Good afternoon, Asia. Good morning, Europe. And good middle of the night to North America. So today I'm joined by James Law, who I've known now for quite a few years. Who's done some fantastic architectural projects all around the world. There's one behind. Is that a model behind you, James?
Yes, that's something we're working on at the moment.
Fantastic. And we're here today to talk about COVID and the impact of COVID on housing and what it means for the way we're going to live in the future. And this can be both in terms of offices, clearly with so many offices closed, people working from home. Offices are going to be a fundamentally different place, but even residential, because of that, we're going to have to find the right way to live at home. And as we all know, megacities around the world just don't have enough housing. The price of real estate pre-COVID here in London was insane, almost as insane as it is in Hong Kong. James, what are your thoughts on what the crisis that COVID has thrown up? It's not entirely a new crisis, I take it, but it's a new angle on this old problem.
Yeah, Thomas, so great to see you, and lovely to share this discussion with the audience around the world. So as an architect, I'm focused on buildings and housing. But for the last, God knows how long, almost a decade, I think it's been apparent to me and apparent to so many people around the world that the way in which we build the world, both physically and non-physically, has become a little bit of a flawed proposition. Right now, as we can see, people are struggling to live in a healthy way, but we were struggling to live economically viably and affordably even before COVID-19. And as an architect, I wanted to bring a discussion to everybody about, the nature of how we should design our housing, how to design a housing economy, how to design the availability of decent shelter for everyone in a world that clearly needs to address those mega trends of urbanization and inflation and cost of living in a way that actually disrupts some of the problems that we are piling on top of ourselves. Here in my own hometown of Hong Kong, which was your home as well, Thomas, for many years, we have probably become the poster boy of this problem. We have the highest cost of living in the world. It's climbing at a rate which is unimaginable, and it gives everybody a sense of inevitability that you'll be trapped in an economy and a life where however hard you work, however hard you save, you cannot get on the housing ladder. And that has ultimately, created a lot of social instability, a lot of political strife. And then right now with COVID-19, it also highlights the physical and the health aspects of housing where, it's just not healthy when you have to live in 100 square feet. So this is
which is not unheard of in the Hong Kong context.
Oh, absolutely. I think we're about 1/3 of the global average of living space in terms of being in a city, and many people do with 100, 200 square feet. Some people even less than that, which is what I wanted to show in the presentation I prepared. And I think in this whole discussion, what I wanted to share with everybody was, and to hear your opinion about this is that clearly we need to find some new direction and new pointers to how we should plan our future cities, how we should plan the moral standards of housing, and really to have almost like a social charter once again created as a housing issue, where housing should be a universal right, and that housing should be decent, healthy, and safe. Unfortunately, we don't live in a world that is making that available.
So should we look briefly at your presentation? You
Yes,
prepared a
please.
slide here.
Sure. So I put together some slides to tell a story, and I'm calling this, in a rather dramatic way, a catastrophe through the housing crisis, micro housing for a better, fairer world. So what I'm trying to say is that there is a massive problem right now in this world through housing. And as an architect, and probably related to that, engineers, designers, developers need to look at other forms of housing, which might be able to continue to be a business, continue to be part of the economy, but also make it possible for people who are lower down in the economic ladder to be able to afford decent housing. So I rely on you, Thomas. So next one, please. So this is my hometown of Hong Kong. I hope many of you have come and visited us. We're a magnificent city. We are very proud of ourselves. And the image of Hong Kong has always been one of the most successfully wealthy and well-developed cities in the world. And all of these buildings and the image of the city is one of energy, one of accomplishment, one of well-planned progress. Unfortunately, we know that in the real world, it isn't as simple as that. And within this kind of image of a successful urbanized city like Hong Kong, we actually have created a massive problem. Next, please. So it's the most expensive city in the world. That in itself seems to be a brand that is we are proud of. But unfortunately, when you are the most expensive city in the world, what happens is the cost of living becomes extraordinarily high. It becomes extremely unaffordable for increasing numbers of people. And the lasting effect of a long-term being the most expensive city in the world is you actually build up a massive amount of problems which you cannot solve even with money. Next, please. So this is the architecture of Hong Kong. As an architect, I have to show a few more slides of skyscrapers. We look at this kind of design and we think, yes, they've solved it. Basically build lots of tall buildings, build lots of housing. We have 7.5 million people now residing in Hong Kong on a very small amount of land, urbanized land. And so this is what we do. We house people in these apartments. And it seems to have solved the problem physically. Unfortunately, the cost of living in these apartments, especially the ones you see in this photo, which is in the center of Hong Kong, in the center of the city, is very, very high. And if you buy an apartment, the average cost of buying an apartment now exceeds $3,000 a square foot, and that's to buy. And the rents, as Thomas would probably attest to, was ridiculously, crazily high as well. Next, please. And the byproduct of having such an extremely high cost of living in terms of housing is that what is built to become affordable, i.e. you can actually pay for an apartment, must now shrink in size in order to be of a ticket price that ultimately is affordable to the middle class or the middle class and above. And here is an example of a real apartment put on sale by a developer, which is about 150 square feet of a usable area, and it sells for in excess of $450,000 US.
Wow.
When you really look at that plan, that plan is equivalent to probably one of the second or third bedrooms in a typical house in Europe. And all of that is your living area. So you don't have a separate living, dining, sleeping space. It becomes one space. And you can see that's a typical maybe queen size bed, and it's occupied most of the space. And the lobby area that comes into the apartment must double up as the kitchen as well as your storage. And then you have a tiny, tiny bathroom, which actually cannot have a bath. You can only have a shower and probably just a wet area approach, not even a shower cubicle. And
tough for a dinner party.
Yeah. It would be a kind of a very intense slumber party, I think. You'll be on the bed. But you see, this is really an interesting physical manifestation of the problem where, you know, if you are able to afford $450,000 to buy a property anywhere else in the world, you could probably afford to buy a house and even maybe have a garden as well. But in Hong Kong, you literally just can live in a room. Many people who cannot even afford to buy an apartment must wait for public housing. And this is the state of our public housing. Very, very old, very, very small, and not enough of it. The average waiting time for housing is now between 5 to 10 years, if at all. So next, please. So this 5 to 10 year wait is literally the golden years of your life. If you are a graduate from university, and you certainly don't have the money unless your family has the ability to help you to afford a property, you need to start to save up. But in the time you're trying to save up, you have to find housing. You want to live in public housing, but you have to wait 5 to 10 years. So in that 5 to 10 years, your limited income, which should have gone to savings to buy an apartment, it goes on to extremely high rent. And so you've neutralized your earning power for at least 5 to 10 years. And that's basically destroyed much of your hope of, you know, rising up in life in terms of your career. So the realities is that many families, even what we call, you know, lower middle class, touching middle class, let alone the lower classes, are living in extremely small spaces. This is a typical picture. This is certainly not an outlier. This is a typical picture of, you know, families having to share the rent, live in a very small apartment, where the apartment is defined as just enough space for them to cook, to eat, to bathe, to live, to do their homework, all in one space. So this is the outcome of being an extremely successful city, a city where, you know, the whole world invests in. Land prices are extremely high and goes higher every year. Properties get smaller and smaller. They get more and more expensive. And the result is that people, however hard they work, they end up living in more or less this kind of space on average. Next, please. So you say, how much does that cost? So here in this typical case, in a family living in this space, which is about 100 to 150 square feet, will pay up to about $1,000 a month of rental. And a family being parents and children, maybe 1 or 2 children, must share this single space for even $1,000 a month. And I think it's gotten to a level where it's, you know, both inhumane as well as economically just a bit crazy, because, you know, if the average salary in Hong Kong is about $2,000, half of that only gets you this to live in. And
we have a question from Adrien, which is there was a plan to build 1 million houses a few years ago in Hong Kong, but the owners did not agree to protect their wealth. Is that true? So have there been plans to build out additional homes?
I'm not aware of a particular plan that you know, has promised 1 million houses. I think that's something that's new that I haven't heard about. There has been attempts by the government with new strategies for increasing the rate of building public housing. Unfortunately, every announcement of increase has been met with the realities of slow progress, because construction is slow, acquiring land is slow, and Hong Kong has this very, very antiquated law where the countryside here, and we actually have a significant amount of green belt and countryside here, is protected as country parks. And so the major tracts of land in Hong Kong legally cannot be built on. And so the government is scrapping around the middle of the city trying to find plots of land to develop as public housing. They are sometimes having to be pressed to do land reclamations from the sea, which takes decades to achieve before they can actually build the housing. And then there's also another factor, which is that they are forced to often sell to the private sector in order to raise revenues for the government coffers every year, because we're a low tax community. So most of the revenues for the public coffers come from land sales. So all of those contradicting factors have led to a pace of public housing that is not commensurate with the needs of the people here in
A
Hong Kong.
dynamic growing city, right?
Yeah, and it's also not something just in Hong Kong. It's also in the rest of the world. So, moving on, just to illustrate the apex of this problem is that, you know, in an aging population like in Hong Kong, just like in the rest of the world, the elderly people don't necessarily have savings, but they still need to live, and some are pressed to live in these what we call caged homes in Hong Kong, where for $250 a month they get a caged bed space, which is basically their own little world, and is entirely inhumane, I would say, and also entirely unhealthy, especially in the context of COVID-19, where, you know, there is no social distancing here. There's no capability for you to, you know, separate yourself from your neighbors.
So you're literally in a cage above your neighbors. So that's a perfect place for COVID to spread.
Absolutely, and there's no escape from it. So you know, the way in which we have built and designed the housing, and in this particular space, is not designed; it's an outcome of need. Is that there is no provision for pandemics and disease and natural disaster, because there's no safety aspect, no health aspect, no resilience aspects to this that has actually been considered. So it's pretty terrible. So let's move on. So what is that outcome? As we have seen in the news recently, even in the last few days, as we can see in the news about Hong Kong for the last 18 months, social unrest has really come to a fore. And in Hong Kong, social unrest is actually very, very rare. The last actual social riots we had was in 1968.
Right.
So we didn't expect that it would necessarily come back. Hong Kong people are actually quite passive and quite civilized in general. But in fact, when you have had this kind of economic structure where people have, you know, had their hopes tested, and they're losing hope about their future, even in terms of just the housing aspect, let alone, you know, democracy or politics and all of these other aspects which are beyond the, you know, the realm of me as an architect, but just the housing aspect. I think a lot of the young people feel that frustration in their future, and they've come out to express their anger. And so we've seen a lot of social unrest, and the livelihood issue must be something that is very, very pervasive in a huge proportion of the population, because in Hong Kong we've seen literally the millions of people, almost like 15, 20 to up to, you know, some people speculate 30% of the population have been willing to come out on the streets to demonstrate their grievances, of which I think a big proportion of those grievances are livelihood driven, of which
Right.
the major part is housing. And I think this is something to bear in mind in terms of the rest of the world as well. So here is a quick video. The Guardian did a video which was quite harrowing. Maybe Thomas, if you can click on that for me.
Okay.
This is a video of the police running down into a subway station, trapping protesters who are on their way home, and basically having quite a violent interaction with them. And it's the last thing you want to see in civil society, when two sides of the story are coming to blows, and it's almost quite frightening.
Exit immediately. Those ticket gates are open. Do not use disabled. 本站將會關閉。乘客必須立即離開。Gates are open. Do not use tickets or octopus cards.
Okay, so a harrowing situation, horrible conflict.
Yeah, and of course, it's not just about housing. It's about many other factors as well. But as you can feel, the amount of stress and pressure and worry in society is quite high. And, you know, life is valuable to each and every one of us. And having a home to to live where we can feel safe, where it's adequate for our needs it's a key basic. And we've gotten to a stage now in Hong Kong where we are only able to build things like this, and we're not building enough of it in order to house everybody that needs a home. So what can we do? So this talk shouldn't be just about problems. It should be about some
What's the
ideas.
solutions here, James? We got a lot of problems. And Hadrian is wondering, is the government protecting tycoons?
I think to answer that question, I think it's I think there's a degree of the government needing to keep the status quo, because the status quo is the basis upon which Hong Kong maintains its economic system. So the tycoons, obviously, they run the major businesses in Hong Kong. They are the major developers in Hong Kong. They buy the government land to develop housing. Although the housing is very expensive, the income from that sale of land is essential to the Hong Kong government topping up its coffers. And the tycoons, they provide a lot of employment in Hong Kong, etc. So whether or not you're saying that they're prejudicially protecting them is, I don't think necessarily so, but I think they are a key part of the infrastructure that needs to be part of the economy here. The nature upon which we have managed to keep our economy going is also one of the problems, because we are such a free market economy that we don't have a real big social housing strategy. So the tycoons can't support social housing. They're doing private housing, and so they're selling those at quite a good margin, I'm sure, for themselves. Because they're paying a lot for the land, and that doesn't actually provide enough affordable housing for people in Hong Kong. So
right, Hadrian is pointing out, and I think that you're going to address that in a moment, is with the population increasing, the status quo cannot cope, and we can no longer stick with the status quo in that sense.
Absolutely, there is a dramatic need. So,
which is what this slide basically says.
Yeah, so conventional housing is too slow to alleviate this problem, and this is a statement that I've discussed with many friends around the world. Different cities and different places around the world have started to contend with this, that the way in which they're providing housing is just too slow to alleviate a problem that is coming to a fore at a rate which is way beyond conventional solutions. Okay, so let's try and find some unconventional solutions. So I want to tell a little story about my own adventures in this. 2 years ago, I was feeling the angst of this problem. Although I'm personally quite lucky, I have a house to live in, but my staff, my friends, their children, everybody is feeling frustrated. And one day I was at a building site of one of my projects, and I came up with an idea called OPOD. And OPOD is a house that is very small, because you can only provide a small house for people, but to do it at a price and flexibility that way disrupts what normal real estate is. So here, to provide a house for $15,000 US. Okay, so what is OPOD? So the next slide will reveal what is OPOD.
Okay, what is OPOD?
Okay. So OPOD is effectively using available concrete water pipes, which is mass manufactured in almost every major city in the world for storm water drainage, and to convert these pipes, which are extremely cheap and already mass produced, into flexible housing for people. Next, please.
Okay.
And the way in which we do that is to basically, if you run that animation, Thomas, thank you, is to connect pipes together and fit out these pipes so that inside there is a living and sleeping area, there's a bathroom, and there's a kitchen, and have these be deployable very quickly to vacant land in any city, and to provide that at a very low rental. And being concrete and being readily available and quickly available is the only way in which we can provide housing that is has an impact better than a conventional building. Next, please. So we went off and built the real one. So this is a picture of one of the real ones. This is one of the prototypes. And if you click through again, you'll see it from different angles. It's actually quite a funky little house that has all of the mod cons you need at a very affordable price. And it's very strong, it's fireproof. It's actually gonna last like 50 to 100 years because it is a concrete water pipe. And it is movable as well. Next, please. This is the inside. The O pod has two parts. This front part is the living area, and the back part is the bathroom and the pantry area. And it's very small, it's only 150 square feet. The sofa can be folded out into a bed. And then all of the furniture here you see are basically recycled construction waste. So scaffolding pipes, timber boards, etc., just repurposed to create this furniture and shelving. Next, please. And at the back, you have that frosted door that goes into the bathroom and shower. On the right-hand side, a tiny food preparation area with a sink, microwave, and a fridge. And on the left-hand side, some open shelving for your clothes and your personal belongings. It even has an air conditioner as well. Next, please. This is a little zoom in to how primitive it is, but also it is decent. It has all the necessary things. We keep the wiring exposed so that we can, tap off the wiring to give other electricity points, etc. And then I think the next slide will show the bathroom at the back. Now the bathroom is very small, just like what you see on a plane or on a boat. But the bathroom actually is really significant because most of the people who are living below the line here in Hong Kong, what you see in those cage living or subdivided flats, they don't have their own bathroom. They all have to share a bathroom. And to be able to have your own bathroom is a almost luxury to them, but I think is almost a kind of common human decency in terms of living. So here we can provide a bathroom for each tenant of each open.
So would this be competitively priced relative to a cage house?
Well, the cage house on rental is at about, I think I said it was around 300 US dollars a month, right? So here it's actually, we are planning to rent this for less than the cage home. So we are going to be around the $200 to $300 range in terms of rental. So,
and it's cheaper than the cage home and less likely to have transmission of COVID, for one thing.
Absolutely. So you live in your own individual living space as opposed to sharing a big room where you're basically in a bunk bed and you're sharing a toilet and sharing a kitchen. So here you have the decency of your own private space. Yeah. Okay. So let's press on. So this is the inside. So this is the next part of the idea is, of course, providing one house isn't enough. So these concrete pipes can be stacked up to create a housing en masse. And so the next slide you will see is the design of this. So you can click on this, Thomas. This is an animation. This is a housing that we're building at the moment, which uses these O-pods in a stacked up manner in the city on a vacant plot of land that allows for quick deployment of affordable housing to people. And that this housing can later, when the land needs to be built on for other things, can be relocated pod by pod and reconfigured into a different configuration somewhere else.
And the air conditioning, I note, is individual air conditioning units rather than a centralized air conditioning.
Absolutely, because we're keeping it as a modular approach, because the next plot of land may only be able to utilize half of these pods. And so if we have any centralized system, it will be very expensive to retrofit it to the different numbers of pods from place to place.
What are you, we're getting a question about the container homes. How does this compare in terms of benefits, disadvantages versus container homes that are sometimes in rural Hong Kong right now?
Yeah, so container homes do exist, and they are also a viable option, except that in reality, because container boxes are made out of steel, they're made out of metal, it comes with some difficulties, like the the fire protection, the heat insulation, and in Hong Kong, building safety is very, very important, and concrete has proven to be the most well-known material to build with. So whilst container boxes could certainly be converted as housing as well, concrete is that much more resilient, that much more strong, and that much more stable from a design point of view. But both can be used. Yeah.
Very interesting.
Okay, so let's go to the next pictures. So here's the real OPOD being moved around our city. We've been doing a lot of tests about moving it around the city. And then the next slide should be a time-lapse video that shows how we move it around the city. So basically, one pod can be dismantled into two pieces, can be loaded onto the back of a truck, and then can be moved from the factory conceptually to a city plot, deployed, placed on the ground, and then connected up with the second pod, and then connect electricity, water, etc. And then if it is a housing project, other pods will arrive next to it and be stacked on top, etc., etc. And this process is very fast. Literally within a day, you can do a couple of them easily. Whereas if you do a real building, it takes months and months, even years to build a building.
Right. So you could finish it in a month or so. You could finish a pod building like the one you showed.
Absolutely. And the great thing is that we can then move it away later as well, because the way in which we're doing these projects now is that we're using what we call transitional land that is underutilized at the moment, but planned in the future to be something else. And we are asking the government to give us that land for up to 5 years to do something, but we shouldn't build a building that cannot be removed later, because then that would create a lot of costs and that would create a lot of disruption. Okay, next please.
Here you stack them up in between two buildings.
Yes, so this is another message we want to give, is that this kind of micro-housing approach actually disrupts a key proposition that a lot of cities have always struggled with, which is to say we don't have enough land. We don't have enough land to build housing for people. But if you don't look only at big tracts of land, but if you look at a city as a micro little jigsaw puzzle where there are lots of missing pieces in the gaps of buildings, in alleyways, etc., we could use a micro architecture like this to infill little plots of land and gaps of land in the city and provide really great housing right in the heart of the city that otherwise we'll have to build many, many kilometers away in order to get land. And so this is a kind of architectural innovation that I hope brings some relief to the struggles of finding land. And for me, I'm really proud of this aspect, because as an architect, we do buildings for clients, but we don't really think about the problem behind, which is that, where do you find the land? How are you going to actually bring relief to people? And this kind of, pixelated, modular, micro housing architecture can do something like that. And there's other examples. So the next slide, you will see an example of a study where we use some of the land under flyovers of highways.
Is this an illustration or did you actually build that?
This is an illustration. This is a piece of land that we're negotiating with the government at the moment, where we are able to place almost 250 units of housing within about 200 meters tract of land under a freeway. And so it's actually quite nice because it's already shielded from the sun, partially shielded from rain. There is some discussion about the quality of the air that comes off the freeway, but this land otherwise would be unused. I mean, it will either just be a kind of very low quality car park that is rented out or just left empty. Why not utilize it for housing in such a kind of desperate times? Next, please.
Very interesting.
And then
the building.
Another aspect is, Thomas, I'm sure you walk past these every day in Hong Kong, where, on the seafront of Hong Kong, we have other structures already built, like these ferry piers. And these ferry piers actually have a flat roof, which is very strong because they were earmarked to build on top of them once upon a time, and they were never built. So there's there's an opportunity to look at some of the infrastructure we have in any city and say that, okay, there's a flat roof, there is a space left on top of the structure. Why not, stack these micro housing units on top and actually create housing for people right at the heart of the city? And in this particular case, these will be the nicest micro housing units in the world. They'll have a sea view of Hong Kong's harbor, and they'll be extremely convenient to get to because they're right in the center of the city. Okay, next, please.
Is that the last slide?
I think that might be the last slide. So the first half of the story was really to, highlight and talk about the systemic problem of affordability in housing, the availability of housing, and the rate in which, societies can actually build housing fast enough to, help people in their lives. And I think in all those three aspects, cities around the world are, failing dramatically on those three fronts. And then in the COVID-19 world and in this kind of economically, broken world at the moment, you can see that, the economic model of real estate, which is to make profits end on end and to increase the value of property, is probably a, quite a suicidal thing to do, because eventually you will basically have people on the streets telling you, hey, this is enough, is enough. Why are we working so hard and we don't have a roof over our head? And then the second half of the talk was just a little bit of fun, where as an architect and using our design passion is to come up with something that hopefully could be
so what is the advantage of the round shape versus a sea container?
There is no particular advantage. The only advantage, I think, is basically the round shape is a readily available pipe.
Right.
We actually don't make that pipe. We actually buy the surplus pipe from the pipe factories, and then we say, look, we're going to use it for housing as opposed to water piping.
So so they give you a discounted price?
Yeah, it's very, very cheap. I mean, the pipe itself is about £1,000 a pipe.
And that's all the core architectural functions and structural functions taken care of. And really what you're doing is interior decoration.
Exactly. And in a very short time, you can have a space that people can actually safely live in. So it's not particularly the shape that matters. It just happens that we are using the circular shape. And actually there's OPOD has a younger brother or older brother, you can say, which is this. This is actually another version which is using a rectangular form, which is actually a box culvert. They call these a box culvert, which is usually used underground for tunnels or for piping, containment. Right. And we're using these also now to create housing. And so we're not exclusively with the circular form. We can also use the rectangular form.
Right. There are advantages to the rectangular form, I guess, in terms of the space efficiencies.
Yes, absolutely. More conventional. Yeah.
Another question coming in, is your initiative a nonprofit in any way?
Yes, entirely nonprofit. What we are doing at the moment is we're getting the land from the government, and the government is funding the construction of these. We are providing the design as an open source at cost. We're doing the project management behind it. And we're treating this as a kind of a social innovation, social enterprise project that we want to share with the rest of the world. Right. And we've been approached by, quite a few parties from different parts of the world. Some are developers, some are housing corporations, some are city management people, to discuss and share this idea. And we hope that, some of you in the audience who might be interested would like to contact us and discuss how we can, share this with you to hopefully bring a real positive alleviation of suffering for where you are coming from. So yes, it's not a profit thing. We're not selling these, like selling a car or anything. We are licensing them out to NGOs around the world or developers around the world who want to do affordable housing.
Okay. And do you think this question coming from Jennifer Chang, do you think this could become a mainstream way of housing, or is this going to be just a buffer for on the fringes of a big problem?
I certainly don't think this is a permanent form of housing. I think there are going to be places where this will bring, a fast relief, and then hopefully allow the construction of permanent housing to catch up, because this is not really something that you want people to live their entire lives in. But I think the reality is that some places which are slow will end up having people live in these things for decades. But it's not what my intentions are. In any case, there is a gap between what we saw in terms of slum housing and permanent housing in terms of affordability and time. And so this kind of transitional housing, which gives that amount of time for people to hopefully save up. And that's why we have rent so low here, is we want to allow the living time here to be an opportunity for people to save money. And then also allow the community to build enough permanent housing to catch up with demand. And so this transition is like, it's like relieving the pressure and to try to avoid some of the other symptoms of this kind of housing problem, which are social unrest and disease and all of those aspects.
Excellent. Okay, great. Well, thank you very much. And when will the first one be open?
Well, the construction of the first project actually starts this year. It's been delayed because of COVID-19, but it starts in November this year. And within 12 months, we will have the first project completed, which will be 155 units here in Hong Kong, and with other projects in the pipeline thereafter. So
where will they be in Hong Kong?
They're in Tsuen Wan, in the Tsuen Wan district, and actually on the sea-facing site. So these lucky tenants will actually be able to have quite a nice view.
Right. Would you see these? One last question coming in from Terrence. Would you see this as a way to temporarily house people in crisis situations, or Fukushima, for example, or refugee situations?
Yes, we've been approached to discuss this thing. In fact, this as a transitional housing for a bit of a long term, like 6 months to 5 years, could work. But it's too heavy to be disaster relief housing, which needs to be delivered literally within a month. And this being 20 tons in weight, you can't put this necessarily, you can't lift this by helicopter easily. You can't. So there is some use for some long-term community disaster relief, but not the immediate fast ones, which tend to be plastic or tent-based or textile-based. Actually, the Hong Kong government discussed with us about using this for the COVID-19 quarantine camps, which are under construction. But in the end, they went for a much more lightweight solution, because they know that they needed it to be done very quickly. In fact, they built one in 1 month recently for the COVID-19, and we can't quite do that with this because this is heavier.
Right. Great. Okay, James. Well, thank you very much. Fascinating project, and it's great it's getting underway, and it's solving one of the big problems that was here before COVID, but is only made that much more difficult with COVID.
Absolutely, yeah.
Great. Okay, thank you very much, James.
Thank you, everyone.